I never thought I would hear my son's voice, shake with fear and embarrassment. But that morning, when the phone rang and I heard Evan whisper, "Mom, all the cards are getting declined. Everyone is staring at us." Something strange rose in my chest. Not pity, not worry, but a cold, steady calm. A feeling I had never experienced with the very boy I raised with whatever strength I had left after losing my husband. Evan was standing in the middle of the Rivercrest Bistro, the most upscale restaurant along the Ohio River, at his mother-in-law's birthday brunch. A place where, for years, I quietly paid their bills more times than I can count, yet was never invited even once. "Tell me the truth, Mom. What's going on? All 5 cards got declined. People are laughing at us." I sat at my breakfast table, my tea still steaming beside me, looking out the window toward the small patio where I'd planted mint pots last spring. No rush, no panic, no trembling. If you've ever been stepped on your whole life, you'll understand that strange sensation. That moment when the old ache suddenly shuts off, making room for a clarity as sharp as early winter sunlight. My name is Marian Doyle. I'm 67, a widow of nearly 8 years, and maybe for the first time in my life, I saw the truth without any sugarcoating. I let a few breaths pass. On the other end, Evan started unraveling, the clinking of silverware, a chair scraping, someone whispering, "What's happening?" And then his mother-in-law's voice, dripping disdain. "Oh God, is it her again? Mom, say something. It's Lydia's birthday. Her whole family is sitting here." Evan's voice cracked like thin glass. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, the entire evening before replayed, sharp and slow like film footage I didn't remember hitting record on. The house had been a little chilly. I'd turned on the fireplace, then brought tea into the living room where Lydia and her friends were gathered. I'm not used to noise, but I tried to be polite. I have always tried to be polite, all my life. Lydia held the cup, glancing at me with that smile I had grown to fear, a small tilt of the lips but packed with the kind of condescension she no longer bothered to hide. "She really has only one job," Lydia said lightly, half joking, half dagger. "Paying the bills and serving tea. What else could she do?" Her friends burst into laughter, and Evan, the boy I once believed was kind, laughed too, like it was the most charming joke in Cincinnati. I stood there holding the warm teapot, and the feeling wasn't pain, it was numbness. Numb from my fingertips all the way to my chest. Not because I'd never heard comments like that before, but because, for the first time, I realized I believed what they thought of me. To them, I wasn't a mother, not a person, just a wallet, a walking ATM with a pulse. And the part that stunned me the most wasn't Lydia's words. It was Evan's laughter. He laughed, comfortably, as if her insult was nothing more than a simple truth the whole world agreed on. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just lay there staring at the ceiling. Then, around 3 a.m, as if something inside finally stood up, I rose, opened my laptop, and did what I should have done 10 years ago. I canceled every supplementary card, locked the emergency savings account, which was really just their fun fund, changed passwords, shut off every automatic transfer. And for the first time, I gave myself back the right to decide the direction of my own life. I knew Evan would lose his mind in the morning, but I also knew it was time he learned what it means to be an actual adult. "Mom, people are staring. Do you know how humiliating this is? Say something." He was almost yelling. I took a sip of tea and said, calmly, shockingly calmly, "You're dealing with your own problem, and you'll have to solve it." "Are you kidding me? This is Rivercrest. Lydia is sitting right here. I don't even have $200 on me." I replied simply, "Evan, you're 36. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. The kind that tells you someone is finally confronting the hollow place inside themselves. Then Lydia's voice leaked through, sharp enough to cut skin. Tell her to turn the cards back on. I'm not waiting another minute. Evan's voice came back, smaller now. Mom, please, just today. It's my mother-in-law. It's family. I looked out the back window, the sunlight just beginning to touch the old brick wall, and said the one sentence life had taught me, slowly, painfully. You handle it. And that was the moment I heard something shatter, not in the restaurant, not through the phone, but inside the habit my son had clung to his whole life. The habit of mistaking being enabled for being loved. I don't know where you're hearing this from or what you're carrying in your own life, but if any part of my story touches you, if it reminds you of someone or maybe of yourself, leave me a small sign. A like, a subscribe. Just something to let me know there are people out there who understand this feeling. And so I can keep telling you stories like this, real stories, from the heart of a woman who's grown tired of swallowing her own silence. Thank you for being here. When the call with Evan ended, I set my phone down on the old wooden kitchen table. The midday light slipped through the thin curtains, laying soft golden streaks across the surface like chalk dust. For years, whenever stress pressed on my chest, I would look at that sunlight and remind myself to breathe. But that morning, I didn't need to calm myself. I felt awake. A cold, steady clarity, unmistakable, almost startling, as if after decades of living in fog, some hidden window in my life had finally opened. I figured Evan would keep calling. I didn't expect him to do anything more than that. But just before noon, I heard a car brake sharply out front. I knew that sound immediately, the engine of the SUV I helped put a down payment on 2 years ago, back when Lydia said a young family needed a safe vehicle. I stayed seated in the kitchen. I didn't move. The car door slammed so hard I felt the vibration in the hanging herb pots. Then footsteps, quick, heavy ones, pounding up the stone walkway. And then 3 loud knocks on the front door. Not like someone asking to enter, but someone trying to break in. Mom, open the door! I didn't budge. My breathing stayed even, like I was listening to a familiar melody. Marian! Lydia's voice, high, sharp, honed with the kind of contempt she never bothered to hide. Open up, we need to talk. I still didn't answer, not because I wanted to anger them, but because I didn't owe them that conversation. Mom! Evan hit the door again, harder. I know you're in there. You can't just hide. A soft laugh slipped out of me. I couldn't help it. Me, the woman who spent her whole life enduring, accommodating, paying, absorbing. And now I was being accused of hiding? I stood, walked to the back door, and stepped into the backyard. The wind from the Ohio River carried the smell of wet grass and fence wood. I settled into my old folding chair, and even from there, I still heard the pounding on the front door. Like the frantic drumming of 2 adults who had never stood on their own legs. Marian, Lydia screeched. This is ridiculous. You humiliated us in front of my family. I closed my eyes. The wind threaded through my hair. A sparrow darted past the roofline, leaving tiny chirps behind. And suddenly I realized this was the first time in years I had been able to sit in my own home. Without fearing someone barging in to demand something or invent another urgent crisis that required my bank account. I wasn't an ATM. I wasn't an endless supply. I wasn't the crutch for a grown couple determined to limp through life. A few minutes later, the knocking turned into kicking. A shoe slammed against the wood with enough force to rattle the frame. Evan shouted, "You're ruining everything. You're making me look like some failure. People recorded us, Mom." And Lydia snapped, "You owe us an explanation. You can't humiliate us like that." Humiliate. They used that word on me. As if the past decade of comments hadn't carved into me. As if their laughter last night wasn't the deepest humiliation a mother could receive from her own child. I stayed silent. Silence. The only thing they couldn't handle. After nearly 10 minutes of pounding, they started circling the yard, peering through windows to find me. I heard their steps scrape along the siding, then Lydia's breathless gasp. "I see her. She's hiding." I turned my back slightly so she could only see my silhouette through the curtain. Then I stood, walked to the living room window, and lifted the curtain just a few inches, just enough for our eyes to meet through the glass. Immediately, Lydia's demeanor changed, like flipping a switch. The venom evaporated. Her voice softened, dripping with sweet manipulation. "Marian, we're family. Just open the door. Talk for a minute. It's all a misunderstanding. You know that." I looked at her, long and steady, not angry, not shaken, just looking. Then slowly, without a word, I let the curtain fall. I heard her scream the moment I dropped it. A short, sharp burst, the sound of someone who just threw a glass against a wall. Finally, the pounding stopped. The two of them began arguing right on my porch. Their voices rose and tangled, each blaming the other. "You should have handled your mother." "No, you should have apologized first." "I'm tired of this." "This is your fault, not mine." Then, another slam of the car door. Tires scraped over the gravel of my driveway, kicking loose stones as their SUV sped away like a threat tossed over their shoulders. But I didn't stand up. I stayed in the backyard, listening to the wind sift through the trees, to the faint rattle of dishes inside the house from the earlier commotion. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. No one demanding, no text buzzing with financial emergencies, no forced smile to keep peace in a family whose peace existed only when I footed the bill. That feeling was weightless, like dropping a backpack filled with rocks I've been carrying for 20 years. I didn't know what they planned next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not open that door, and I would not reopen my heart. Yesterday, I stepped through a doorway I will never step back through, and if they want to find me, they will have to come with respect, not fists on wood. That afternoon felt unusually quiet. No cars rolling down the street, no neighbors calling to one another across their lawns. Just the wind brushing along the stone steps my husband laid by hand 30 years ago. I sat in the kitchen again, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, letting myself feel a kind of peace I hadn't tasted in years. A peace I once believed I would never reclaim. I thought that after the door-pounding fiasco that morning, Evan and Lydia would disappear for a few days, lick their wounds, and regroup before coming up with their next strategy. But I underestimated them. Truth is, I had underestimated the entitlement I'd been feeding for far too long. My phone started buzzing barely an hour after they drove off. First Evan, then Lydia, then an unknown number, then Lydia's mother, then Evan again. I left the phone lying flat on the table, the screen lighting up in rhythmic bursts, like the frantic fluttering of a trapped bird. I didn't answer. It wasn't until the 14th call that I finally picked it up. Not to speak, but to silence it altogether. The screen overflowed with messages, all echoes of things I'd heard 1,000 times before. "What are you doing? Talk to us. This isn't normal behavior. You're making things worse." I'd heard every one of those lines my whole life. I didn't need to hear them again. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard a door close. Not mine, but the one out by the front gate. Someone had come. Someone who knew I was inside, and who knew I didn't want to see them. I stepped softly to the living room window and lifted the curtain just enough to make out the shape. Lydia. Alone. But not the Lydia from this morning, the one who screamed at my door. And not the one from last night, smirking at my expense in a room full of people. This Lydia had rearranged her face into something else entirely. Hair neatly pinned, neutral lipstick, a tidy coat. One glance, and I knew I was looking at her next performance. She rang the bell. Once, then twice, then a third time. "Marian?" she called, her tone oddly small. "I know you can hear me." I stood behind the glass, holding my breath. "We need to talk," she continued, voice softer than anything she'd ever used with me. "I didn't want Evan to know I came. I'm here because we're family." Family, a word she only ever used when she needed something. I stayed silent. "You misunderstood me, Marian," she went on, keeping her voice gentle, almost delicate. "I didn't mean to offend you last night. It was a joke, poorly delivered, that's all. I remembered exactly how she laughed when she said that line. There was nothing accidental about it. I want to apologize, she added carefully, exaggerating every syllable like she was reading from a script she hadn't rehearsed enough. Still, nothing. No footsteps approaching the door. No lock turning, just silence. The kind of silence that unnerved her. You can't just ignore us, she snapped then, the sweetness dissolving. You're hurting Evan. He's worried about you. He thinks you're losing control. There was a bitter irony in that, being diagnosed as unstable by the very people who depended on me for their stability. People who hadn't paid a single bill without my help. People who hadn't lived a single year without my financial safety net. I pressed my hand to my chest to steady my breathing. Marian, she said again, colder now. You're making yourself look bad. You're destroying this family. Family. I held that family together with money and silence for a decade. If it crumbled the moment I stopped paying, then it was never a family to begin with. I turned away from the window and let Lydia talk to the empty air. 5 minutes later, I heard her heels clicking across the porch, followed by a heavy sigh, then her car engine struggling to start, stalling twice before catching, like even her pride was slipping. I thought that would be the end of it, but my life has never followed the simple script. Around 6 that evening, while I was making a simple dinner of chicken soup and toasted bread, I heard another knock. This one was soft in a way that carried respect. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked through the peephole. It was Lydia's mother, Eleanor. I didn't dislike Eleanor. In fact, she was the only person in their family who had ever treated me with even a shred of courtesy. But her showing up now wasn't random. Nothing about today was random. I didn't open the door, but I didn't walk away either. Marian? She called gently. I'm not here to argue. I just want to understand. I stood behind the door, silent. Evan and Lydia told me you cut off all the accounts? She said, a genuine note of surprise in her voice. I wanted to hear it from you. Did something happen? I leaned my forehead against the door. I was tired. So tired I felt like dropping right where I stood. Then Eleanor said something I'll remember for a very long time. Marian, sometimes we've been mothers for so long. We forget that we're people too. I clenched my jaw. Her words, coming from someone outside the chaos, struck right at the center of me. I'm not asking you to open the door, she continued. I just want to say, if what I suspect is true, then you had every right. And no one should make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. I felt my heart soften a little. Just a little. Maybe because, for the first time in this whole long story, someone stood on my side without expecting anything in return. That's all I wanted to say, she murmured. If you want me to leave, I will. And she did. No pressure, no slammed doors, no accusations. Just a quiet departure, the kind I didn't know I needed until it happened. Night fell faster than I expected. The house was still, filled only with the wind from the riverbank and the steady ticking of the wall clock, each tick landing on my chest like a reminder. I sat on the sofa, the warm lamplight falling across my aging hands. And I realized something. Evan and Lydia weren't angry because I cut the money. They were angry because I did it without warning, without permission, without asking them first. I had broken the role they wrote for me 10 years ago, and they weren't going to stop. Morning brought pounding fists. Afternoon brought fake apologies. Evening brought polite diplomacy. I knew exactly what would come next. The real plan. The big one. The plan to take back what they believed was theirs, my money. They wouldn't give up, and I wouldn't either. The next morning, Cincinnati was colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that makes you hunch your shoulders and walk faster, but the kind that settles into your fingertips, reminding you that winter is coming, and the things you've been avoiding can't be avoided forever. I woke with a sense of forewarning, like someone had turned up the music in the basement and I couldn't hear it, only feel the vibration through the floorboards. I knew Evan and Lydia weren't done. I felt it the moment I opened my eyes, and I was right. I was making my morning coffee when the landline rang, that old, warm sound I used to love, the one that reminded me of mornings when my husband was still alive. Today, the same sound felt like something I didn't want anywhere near me. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I picked up, not to talk, but just to make the noise stop. "Marian, it's Elaine." Elaine, my younger sister in Kentucky. If she was calling this early, something was wrong. I hadn't even opened my mouth before she said, "Evan told me you're having issues." Silence stretched across my kitchen like a wire pulled too tight. "What issues?" I asked, my voice slow but steady. "He said, you froze the joint account. You canceled their cards. You locked everything down. He says you're acting strange, maybe not fully yourself." And there it was, the real plan, not the fake apologies, not the door pounding, not the dramatic, "you embarrassed us" routine. This was the next step, paint me as mentally unstable. I closed my eyes for 1 solid second. "Elaine," I said gently, "I'm completely fine. I just stopped paying for their fabricated emergencies." Elaine's voice softened, conflicted. "Are you sure? Evan said—" I cut her off. "You know how he is. He's used to me fixing everything. Now that I'm not doing it, he thinks I've lost my mind." On the other end, she exhaled. A sigh tangled somewhere between believing me and believing him. "I just wanted to check on you. I'm steadier than you think." But deep down, I knew Elaine didn't call on her own. The cadence of her voice, repeating phrases that didn't sound like hers, told me something else. Evan and Lydia were already spreading a different story, a dangerous one. They were preparing to argue that I was no longer capable of managing my own finances, and if they pushed it far enough, they could file for guardianship. What would that mean? It meant they, the people who drained my savings for 10 years, could take legal control of my entire estate by convincing a court that I was no longer competent. I set the phone down slowly. Not angry, not shocked, just cold. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather. About an hour later, while I was washing dishes, I saw a figure outside the front gate, reflected in the glass of the kitchen window. Tall, slim, shoulders tense, phone in hand. Lydia. She didn't ring the bell, she didn't knock, she was recording. I went still, my hand resting on a porcelain bowl, my heartbeat slowing into something steady and deliberate. Lydia swept her phone across the front of my house, the windows, the plants, my car, before stopping at the kitchen window. I stepped back behind the refrigerator, out of sight. What was she looking for? Evidence, anything she could spin. A clip of me not answering the door, or worse, reacting poorly, and she'd claim I was unstable, paranoid, confused, avoiding human interaction. Enough to justify a legal push for control of my finances. I watched through the sliver between the fridge and the cabinet. Lydia held up her phone like she was photographing an endangered species. Then she spoke, loud enough to be picked up on camera. "Marian, can you hear me? We're really worried about you. You're isolating yourself. This isn't normal behavior." Every word was ice. Every word was evidence. A brick being laid for the narrative they wanted. I backed farther into the shadows. My heart was fast, but my mind was sharp. If I stepped out, even to defend myself, they could edit it however they wanted. If I stayed silent, they could twist it into avoidant or mentally declining. I was being pushed into a trap I had never seen before. After another minute of filming, Lydia got back into the car and drove away. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I sat down at the kitchen table, gripping the edge with both hands. I thought of Evan as a little boy, racing across the yard in his red shoes. I thought of all the nights I held him when he was scared of the dark. I thought of every sacrifice I made so he could go to college. How does a child like that become a man willing to prove his own mother is losing her mind? The answer was simple. Not because I didn't love him enough, but because I loved him the wrong way. I taught him that love meant sacrifice. I taught him that I'd always be there. I taught him that his needs mattered more than mine. And now he was simply living out the script I had unknowingly written. The realization hurt, but in a strangely clear way. Painful, but not shattering. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the riverbank, I made a decision I hadn't considered once in 10 years. I needed a lawyer. Not a family attorney. I searched for a small Cincinnati firm known for handling elder financial exploitation and guardianship disputes. When I called, the receptionist asked me a question that froze me in place. "Are you calling about a guardianship case or a financial abuse case?" My hand tightened around the phone. I answered, "Possibly both." She scheduled me for the next morning. I hung up and looked out into the yard, where the shadow stretched long and uneasy across the grass, cast by trees that had been here longer than my marriage. I understood, with a stillness that felt like stepping into cold water. I had entered a battle I never asked for, one I could no longer avoid. And inside me, one truth settled with the weight of stone. They are planning. They are strategizing. And I will not be crushed again. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. No alarm. No noise outside. Just the simple truth that I couldn't stay in bed any longer. It felt like something pulled me up. The alertness of someone who has finally woken up after years of being taken advantage of. I brewed a pot of coffee and poured it into the mug my husband used to love. Steam drifted up in a thin, wavering veil, like a curtain between me and everything I was about to face. And when I took that first sip, I knew. Today would change everything. I had to meet the attorney. Not for revenge, not to escalate, but to protect myself. Something I'd never fully done in 67 years. The law office was in one of Cincinnati's older neighborhoods, right by the river. A red brick building with tall windows looking out over the slow-moving Ohio. I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting in my car with damp palms pressed against the steering wheel. The last time I met a lawyer was to sign my husband's death certificate. Stepping back into that world felt like reopening a wound. Inside, the place smelled of paper, polished wood, and the steady hum of a coffee machine. A world where everything can be documented, measured, filed, and used as evidence. "Mrs. Marian Doyle?" the receptionist asked with a warm smile. "Attorney Nolan will see you shortly." I sat down, my heart thudding against my ribs. A few minutes later, the door opened. A man in his early 50s stepped out, silver at the temples, sharp eyes, steady posture. "Mrs. Doyle, please, come in." His office was simple, no decorative clutter, just law books, framed family photos, and a small plant by the window. I sat, placing my purse on my lap, pressing my hands together to stop them from trembling. "I read over the notes from your call," he began. "You mentioned the possibility that your family is trying to gain control of your finances?" I nodded. Then I told him everything, every detail. The canceled cards, the pounding on my door, Lydia filming outside my home, the spreading rumors that I was unstable, acting strange, not in control. The years of financial drain, the emergencies, the trips, the restaurants, the endless bills I paid in exchange for silence. Finally, I said, they can't stand the fact that I stopped. And I think they'll try to make me legally powerless. Nolan didn't answer right away. He flipped a page in his notebook, clicked his pen, then looked directly at me. "Your concerns," he said calmly, "are valid." My chest tightened, not out of fear, but from the relief of being understood. He continued, "Cases where adult children try to declare an elder parent incompetent to gain financial control are not rare, especially when," he paused, "when the parent owns meaningful assets." "I'm not rich," I whispered. "You have a home, accounts, savings. For some people, that's more than enough to spark greed." I stared down at my hands, marked with age spots and years of work. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, leaning slightly forward, "they could file a petition claiming you're behaving irrationally. The canceled cards, the locked accounts, the refusal to open the door. They'll use all of that." A shiver ran through me, because that was exactly what Lydia was preparing. "However," he added, voice firming, "the good news is, a court won't accept that claim without medical evidence, not just emotional testimony." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But if they pressure you or start spreading rumors or raise enough questions, there could still be legal proceedings, and they will take a toll. I met his eyes. What should I do? He set down his pen and spoke with a clarity that cut straight through the fear. You need to protect yourself in 3 ways. I held my breath. He raised 3 fingers. 1. Help me compile a complete record of your financial history with them. Every transfer, every bill, every transaction. We must establish a clear pattern of financial exploitation. I nodded. I had it all. I kept everything. 2. Schedule a cognitive evaluation with a licensed psychologist, immediately. I blinked. Why? Because we need documented proof that you are mentally competent. If they attack, we need a shield. My throat tightened, not from panic, but from the heaviness of realizing what I must do to protect myself. For my own son. And 3, Nolan said slowly, deliberately, you must stop opening the door for them. And stop speaking to them verbally. All communication should be in writing only. Everything must be documented. My lips pressed together. He added, softer, I know that's painful. But you're in a situation where anything you say can be recorded, cut, twisted, and used against you. I placed a hand over my chest, not out of fear, but to steady the beating inside. You're not the first person to sit in that chair, he said gently, and you won't be the last. But you are one of the few who recognized the danger early enough. Something shifted inside me then. Not shame, not betrayal, just clarity, and a deep, clean sadness. When I left the office, wind from the Ohio River lifted my hair. The sky above the city was a cold, clear blue, almost too honest in its brightness. I paused beside my car, looking back at the red brick building I had just walked out of. I knew, with a calm certainty, this fight was no longer about money. It was about my worth, as a mother, a widow, a human being. I had let others define that worth for far too long. I had given too much without asking anything back. Now, I was reclaiming it, inch by inch. And for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, Marian, you're doing the right thing. As I drove home, my phone started vibrating again in my purse, buzzing continuously. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Evan. Lydia. Maybe even Lydia's mother. They were going to escalate. They were going to push harder. They were going to use every manipulation tactic they knew, and a few I wasn't prepared for. But like the wind sweeping across the Roebling Bridge that brushed against my face on the drive, I felt stronger with every mile. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an attorney. I had the truth. And most importantly, I finally had myself. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was higher, casting long beams across the front lawn. I thought I'd have a quiet afternoon to breathe after meeting with Attorney Nolan. But less than 10 minutes after stepping inside, I understood one thing clearly. The quiet was only temporary. I set my purse on the table, hadn't even taken off my coat, when my phone began vibrating like it was possessed. Unknown number. Then another. Then one from out of state. Then one from the church I used to attend. They had already moved on to the next phase of their plan, pulling everyone around me into the story. It's a classic tactic used by people trying to frame someone as unstable. Spread the rumors first, plant the doubt early, then let public perception do the rest. I knew that, and still, I wasn't prepared. I didn't answer, but my voicemail recorded every voice, a list of people who hadn't thought about me in years until someone activated them. The first message was from Linda, an old book club friend. Marian, are you okay? I heard you froze your accounts and cut off contact with your family. Everyone's really worried. The second was from Pastor Raymond. Mrs. Doyle, Evan mentioned you've been showing signs of extreme anxiety. If you need spiritual counseling or emotional support, please know we're here. Emotional support, mental state. They were targeting my stability. Then came a voice I never expected in a million years. Diane, the neighbor I only waved at from the window. Hi, Marian. Evan said you've been staying in the house alone and refusing to answer the door. He's worried you're getting confused. Do you need someone to stop by? Confused. I set the phone down slowly, feeling like someone had slapped me with the exact words I'd always feared being labeled with. I stepped outside to the backyard, searching for air, a habit I'd picked up since all of this began. Sunlight bounced off the small bird bath in the corner of the yard, scattering little sparks across the water. I'd never paid attention to those before, but today, even the sunlight couldn't settle me, because I heard voices from the front yard, women's voices, close, familiar. I moved toward the kitchen door and peeked through the curtain. 3 women stood at my front door. Not Lydia, not her mother. Lydia's friends. I recognized them from last night's gathering, the same group that laughed when Lydia called me a walking credit card. One of them, Amanda, wearing a cream cardigan, tapped lightly on the door as if she were visiting a dear friend. "Marian, we just want to make sure you're okay. Lydia said you were under a lot of stress." A lot of stress. My God. I leaned closer to hear. "She seemed a little out of it last night," the second woman said. "Yeah, Lydia said she's been paranoid, thinking they've been taking advantage of her." All 3 laughed. Paranoid. Out of it. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. Then one of them asked the question that made me freeze. "Should we call social welfare? Elderly people living alone can get confused easily." Social welfare. That wasn't an innocent suggestion. It was bait. A test. If someone from Adult Protective Services showed up, and if I reacted poorly, or refused to talk, or looked defensive, they could document it. One small note, and Lydia would twist it until it became part of a full case. I stepped back from the door as if it were on fire. The 3 women lingered another minute and then walked away, like they had just completed an assignment. And I realized, Lydia had mobilized her entire social circle to turn me into a problem. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang again, but this time, a man's voice followed. Oscar, Lydia's cousin-in-law. I'd met him a few times. A man who always spoke as if he knew more than you, understood you better than you did, and believed every woman's issue stemmed from emotional instability. I didn't open the door, but I stood behind the curtain, letting every word slice through the quiet. "Marian, I heard you've been having difficulties. Evan said you're isolating, not eating or sleeping. Women your age fall into those episodes easily." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. He continued, tone dripping with authority. "We're trying to help, truly. But if you won't cooperate, we may need to notify someone with proper authority to make sure you're safe." Someone with authority. This wasn't a vague threat. This was a step, a deliberate step toward building a case that I was an elder in need of guardianship. Exactly what Attorney Nolan had warned me about. I stood there, on the other side of that door, my hand shaking, not from fear, but from pure, righteous fury. I had raised my son with everything I had, and now he was using every piece of my love as ammunition against me. Oscar left after a few minutes, and the front yard fell into a silence so sharp it almost rang. I returned to the kitchen and switched on the warm yellow light. It spilled across the table, the half-finished coffee, the wooden chairs I had painted myself after my husband passed. And in that moment, I understood with painful clarity. I was no longer in a financial war. I was in a battle for my dignity. Lydia didn't just want money, she wanted control. She wanted to take away my voice by turning me into someone who had none. That's how people like her operate. If they can't win through affection, they win through reputation. If not reputation, then law. And when the law doesn't help, they use rumor, suspicion, and fear. I poured myself a glass of water, drank slowly, breathed slowly, and whispered to myself, "Marian, this is where you have to be strong. No more tears, no more self-blame, no more protecting anyone else's image. Only one truth remained. They wanted to take my power, and I would not let them." The next morning, I woke with the kind of exhaustion that feels like you've been running all night in your sleep. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming softly, and the clock on the wall ticking out each second like a slow reminder of time passing. No cars in the driveway, no doorbell, no Lydia, no Evan, no Oscar. But the stillness, felt like the kind that comes before a storm, a silence that makes your skin prickle. Today, I had an appointment with the psychologist Attorney Nolan recommended, the cognitive evaluation. To be honest, the idea alone made me feel like I was being forced to prove that I was still myself, a strange feeling, both insulting and necessary. I got ready as if I were meeting a strict teacher, hair neatly brushed, coat adjusted carefully, a touch of the perfume my husband used to love. Not to look impressive, but to remind myself that I was still me. No one had the right to rewrite that. The clinic was on the 6th floor of a building downtown. When the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by the scent of polished wood and faint lavender, something that softened my heart just a little. Her name was Dr. Kendra Hale, mid-40s, small frame, sharp eyes. She didn't look at me like a patient. She looked at me like someone stepping into a difficult battle, and she intended to stand beside me. "Mrs. Marian?" "Yes." "It's very nice to meet you. We'll take this one step at a time, nothing to worry about." Her voice made me want to believe that. We stepped into a small room with warm lighting, no threatening posters, no sterile charts, just 2 chairs facing each other and a window looking down at the traffic below. "Before we begin," she said, "I want you to understand something. The goal of this assessment is not to find something wrong with you. The goal is to create evidence that you are perfectly competent." I nodded. I knew that. But hearing it said aloud loosened something in my chest. The test began. And it wasn't nearly as frightening as I expected. "What day is it, Mrs. Marian?" "Tuesday." "And where are we right now?" "Cincinnati." "Can you remember these 3 words and repeat them back in a few minutes?" "I'll try." "Tell me about your family." I told her, not everything, just the necessary parts. "And why are you here?" she asked. I breathed in deeply. "Because someone is trying to say I'm not in my right mind." She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes weren't filled with pity, they were filled with understanding. "And how do you feel about that?" she asked. Slowly, clearly, I answered. "I've been quiet for too long. My silence made them think they had the right to define me." Dr. Hale gave a small, knowing smile, one that told me she had seen many people sit where I was sitting. "A lot of older adults are targeted by their children or relatives who want control of their finances," she said gently. I swallowed hard. "But you," she continued, "you came here to protect yourself. That says everything." The evaluation lasted almost 2 hours. Memory, reasoning, real-world problem-solving, emotional stability. Some questions felt like stepping into old wounds I thought I'd buried. By the time we finished, the sun was already high. I felt like I had run a marathon with both my past and my future strapped to my back. "Mrs. Marian," Dr. Hale said as I stood up, "I want you to know something. You are entirely competent. There are no signs of cognitive decline, nothing concerning." I closed my eyes for a second, just 1 second, but a hot tear escaped anyway. Not from weakness, from relief. "In the next 48 hours, she told me, you'll receive a full written report. That document will be your strongest shield if anyone tries to pursue guardianship." I took her hand, gently but firmly. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm here," she said. "You're not alone in this." When I stepped out of the clinic, the sun landed on my shoulders like a steadying hand. I got into my car, set my purse on the passenger seat, and only then realized my phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Evan. Calling, texting, calling again. Message after message. Then Lydia, then a few numbers I didn't recognize. I opened just one text, only one. "Why did you see a doctor? Do you think something's wrong with you? Let me talk to them for you." I turned the phone off immediately. What chilled me wasn't the question. It was the fact that they knew. They knew I went to the doctor. Immediately. Who told them? Who watched me? Who was reporting back? I scanned the parking lot, no one in sight. But the feeling of being observed crawled up my neck like cold water. I started the engine and drove home slowly. A tight wire stretched across my chest the whole way. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a white envelope tucked under the welcome mat. I picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakable. Marian, we need to talk about this. Don't let things escalate. Evan. I stood there, in the cold wind, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. No apology, no remorse, just a warning. A gentle threat wrapped in concern. If you don't cooperate, we will escalate. I folded the paper neatly, walked inside, and placed it on the table. I didn't rip it. I didn't cry. I simply said one sentence, soft enough that only I could hear it. They don't know I'm not the same woman anymore. That afternoon, I called Attorney Nolan. When I told him about the note and the fact that Evan somehow knew about the evaluation, he fell silent for a long second. Then said, "Mrs. Marian, that confirms something. They're monitoring your movements." "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "It could be someone reporting back to them, or relatives sharing information. Either way, it's not good." A chill slid down my spine. "We move faster now," he said. "Send me the report as soon as you get it. I'll draft the protective filings immediately." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'm with you," he added. "Don't be afraid." And when he said that, I felt something shift again. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I wasn't the mother hiding behind a door being pounded on. I wasn't the woman being turned into a problem. I was becoming Marian Doyle again, someone who had lived, loved, lost, and now, someone who was standing back up. And I braced myself for what I knew was coming next. Evan and Lydia would escalate. No more hints, no more whispers, something bigger, bolder, more shameless, and it was already on its way. That morning, I woke before the sun fully came up. The blue-gray light seeped through my bedroom window, casting a cold wash across the walls, making the whole house feel as if it were holding its breath alongside me. No cars, no birds, no wind, just the sound of my own heartbeat, steady but heavy. I made coffee, trying to draw warmth from the familiar routine. But every movement, pouring water, switching on the machine, listening to the grinder, felt wrapped in a thin layer of tension. The evaluation was done. Evan's letter had arrived. Attorney Nolan was preparing the filings. Part of me naively thought that after all that, Evan and Lydia would back off, treat me like the brick wall I had finally put up. But I was naive. They hadn't lost yet, so they wouldn't stop. I was halfway through breakfast when I heard a car door slam outside. I shot up from my chair, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain open just enough to see. A silver sedan I didn't recognize. The door opened. And the person who stepped out wasn't Evan, wasn't Lydia. It was Mark, my younger son, the one I always thought was the quiet one, the one who stayed out of family drama, who always said, "I don't want to get involved." And maybe that was why he was the last person I expected to see. Mark wore a simple t-shirt, a dark hoodie, hands in his pockets, as if he were just stopping by to check on his mother. But his eyes weren't the eyes I remembered. There was hesitation there, but also purpose. "Mom?" he called, standing at the door. I didn't answer. "Mom, it's me, Mark." His voice was gentle, not loud, not demanding. And somehow, that gentleness scared me more. "I just want to talk." I stood behind the door, hand on the lock, but I didn't turn it. "I know Evan and Lydia bothered you," Mark continued. "I'm not like them. I just want to hear your side." I closed my eyes for 1 second. I'm not like them. That's what people say when they want your trust, just moments before they twist the knife. "Mom, please open the door. I'm not taking sides. I just want you to calm down." Calm down. Another phrase, another label. I stepped away from the door. I wouldn't let my emotions lead me. Mark called a few more times. No banging, no yelling. Then he stepped back. I heard the rustle of something in his hoodie pocket. I glanced through the curtain. He was holding a piece of paper, and I recognized it instantly. Not a letter, a court form. A petition for an adult competency evaluation. My knees nearly gave out. I had to grip the table to stay upright. Mark stared directly at the door, as if he knew I was there. "Mom, I don't want to do this. Evan said you're struggling. I just want to make sure you're okay." Then he bent down and placed the paper on the doorstep, pressing it so it wouldn't blow away. "I'm not signing this," he said. "But Evan said, if you keep refusing to talk, they'll file it without me." I swallowed hard, but my throat felt like dry stone. Mark turned toward the car, walking slowly. Before he got in, he looked back at the door. "Mom, if you don't tell me the truth, I can't take your side." And that sentence, that last sentence, cut deeper than anything Lydia had ever thrown at me, because it came from the child I believed understood me best. He got in the sedan, backed out, and disappeared down the road. I stood there in the doorway, barefoot on the cold floor, hand over my chest, holding my breath together piece by piece. When I was sure he was gone, I opened the door, picked up the paper. The white court form gleamed in the morning sun. Petition for evaluation of adult competency. Signature, blank. Reason for filing, blank. But the message wasn't blank. They had chosen their path. They had prepared the paperwork. They were circling behind me, one step at a time. And the worst part? They were turning my own children against each other. That was the cruelest move of all. I took the document into the kitchen and placed it on the wooden table. Morning light washed over it, making it look almost luminous, like a reminder that every nightmare unfolding was very, very real. I called Attorney Nolan immediately. He picked up on the second ring. "Attorney Nolan, Mark just came to my house. With a form." "What kind of form?" "A competency petition." He was silent for 3 long seconds, 3 seconds that felt like a full minute. "Mrs. Marian," he said finally, "this confirms it. They're moving forward. There is no doubt now." My stomach tightened. "But they didn't sign it," I whispered, clinging to one last shred of hope. "Unsigned doesn't mean unplanned," he replied. "Listen to me. From this moment on, do not open the door for anyone unless you absolutely know who they are. And any communication from Evan or Lydia, redirect it to me." "I'm worried about Mark," I said quietly. "Mark let himself be pulled in," Nolan said gently. "But what matters now is that you do not give them a single reaction they can use against you." "What should I do?" "Wait and prepare." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Prepare for what?" "Confrontation," he said. "We're past the warning signs. The legal fight is coming." I inhaled deeply, grounding myself with a hand on the back of the kitchen chair. "Mrs. Marian," Nolan said softly, "you're stronger than they think, and right now, we're one step ahead." One step, but I knew Evan and Lydia wouldn't let me keep that step for long. When I hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table, looking at the form in front of me. My hand rested on it, feeling the texture of the paper, reminding me that I was still here, still conscious, still in control of my own life. And I said to myself, I will not let them take that from me. Not with words, not with paperwork, not with manipulation, not at any cost. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after Mark left. The petition lay on the table, so starkly white it almost glared back at me. No wind, no cars, not even the usual bird song. Only one thing hung in the air, the feeling that Evan and Lydia were moving in closer, step by calculated step, no longer through arguments or guilt, but through paperwork, a kind of battle I always feared, but never truly believed they would dare to launch. That afternoon, I stood on my front porch, staring at the trees lining the yard. Sunlight slanted across the grass, as if trying to comfort me, but nothing eased the pressure rising in my chest. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I knew that feeling, the cold along my spine before my mind even caught up. I answered. "Is this Mrs. Marian Whitmore?" A woman's voice, firm, professional. "Yes?" "My name is Carla Simmons with Hamilton County Adult Protective Services." I froze. "We received a report regarding a possible decline in your mental capacity. I need to schedule a home visit to evaluate your safety and ability to care for yourself. I had to brace one hand against the wall to steady myself. Clear, as clear as the sunlight hitting my face. Evan and Lydia had moved to the next phase. Not threats, not hints, a formal report. I tried to keep my voice steady. Miss Simmons, who filed the report? I'm not permitted to release the reporter's identity, she replied, tone flat as if reading from a script. But I knew exactly who. I do not consent to a home inspection, I said. Ma'am, if you refuse, we must document non-cooperation. That may lead to the court ordering a mandatory evaluation. I closed my eyes. Mandatory. Court-ordered. Forced evaluation. Exactly what Evan and Lydia wanted. A cold voice rose inside me. Fine, my attorney will contact you. I hung up before she could say more. And in that moment, it felt like someone poured ice water down my spine. Not because I was afraid of the evaluation. I had Dr. Hale's cognitive report coming. What hurt was knowing my own child, the child I raised with everything I had pushed me this far. I called Attorney Nolan right away. He listened, exhaled sharply. Mrs. Marian, they're building a case against you. This is textbook. To take my money? I asked. Not just your assets. Their goal is legal guardianship. That would give them full control. Your finances, your home, even decisions about where you live. My pulse thudded so hard it hurt. So they want to strip my rights? Yes. My fingers trembled, but my voice didn't. Not anymore. Mr. Nolan, I won't let them. I know, and will push back. But you must be extremely careful now. They only need one detail to use as evidence. What kind of detail? Anything, he said. A messy house, a late bill, a sentence that sounds confused, a moment of emotion, anything they can twist. I looked around my home, every chair, every cup, every ordinary thing reflecting the life of a woman in her late 60s who was still fully aware, fully present. And I said, I'm not letting them take my life. That night, Cincinnati fell into rain. Streetlights spilled gold across the window, stretching into long streaks on the floor. I turned on the lamp in the living room, letting the warm glow fill the space, even if warmth wasn't something I felt much these days. I had just set the kettle down when headlights swept across the kitchen wall. I froze. Not Mark, not Evan, not Lydia's SUV. A black sedan, the kind professionals drive. A man stepped out, clipboard in hand. Dark jacket, efficient posture. I didn't need a closer look to know, an independent evaluator, the type Evan would hire to strengthen his case. They weren't waiting, they wanted speed. They wanted pressure. They wanted to corner me before I could hit back. A knock at the door. Mrs. Marian? I'm Gregory Hale, independent assessor. I'm here to conduct a preliminary safety interview. I stood behind the door, my heartbeat steady in a way that surprised me. Not fear, not panic, just clarity. I needed to be sharper than they expected. I didn't open the door. I don't have an appointment with you, I called through the wood. It'll take just 10 minutes, ma'am, a quick safety check. You're not following protocol, I said. All communication goes through my attorney. I will not open the door. Silence. I pictured him writing, noting the refusal, building their narrative. Then he said, I'll have to report that you declined the assessment. Go ahead, I replied. My attorney will follow up. He didn't answer, only footsteps retreating. A car door shutting. And the black sedan rolling off down the hill. I leaned back against the wall, letting out a long breath, not from fear, from recognition. This was only the beginning. I returned to the kitchen, poured tea into my cup, watched the steam curl through the lamplight. And in that quiet, I finally understood something I hadn't seen clearly until now. The only victory they can claim is making me afraid. If I'm not afraid, they can't touch me. I stood up straighter, set the cup down gently, and whispered, a promise to myself. If they want to fight, they're about to meet a Marian they never imagined. I barely slept that night, not because of fear, but because I realized I had crossed into a place no mother ever imagined she'll have to stand. The threshold where you prepare to defend yourself against the very children you once protected with your whole body. Outside, the rain kept tapping softly against the roof, like Cincinnati itself was warning me. This storm wasn't done, not even close. By morning, the house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of the river. When I opened my front door to pick up the paper, something else was waiting for me on the mat. A thick envelope, not mail, not a flyer, a summons. I didn't even have to open it to know. The seal of the Hamilton County Court was printed right on the front. My hands didn't shake, not even my breathing. I tore the envelope open, and there it was. Evan had filed a petition for guardianship. He was asking the court to declare me incapacitated so he could be appointed my legal guardian. The first page listed the accusations: financial instability, impulsive decision-making, risk of self-harm through mismanagement of funds, non-cooperation with family and evaluators. Each phrase hit me like a clean, cold blade. None of it was true, but none of it had to be true, if they told the story well enough. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly. Somewhere in the fog of memory, I could still see the little boy Evan once was, running through the yard with his curly hair bouncing, crying when he scraped his knee, curling beside me during thunderstorms. That boy, that sweet, tender boy, was gone. And in his place stood a 35-year-old man willing to write that his own mother cannot be trusted with her own decisions. I called Attorney Nolan immediately. He told me to bring everything to his office now. Rain was still falling when I drove downtown. Cincinnati winters always felt like grief, a cold that seeped into your bones. Not violent, just steady. Like a truth you can't outrun. In Nolan's conference room, I laid the papers on the table. He flipped through each page, jaw tightening. Mrs. Marian, they're escalating. This is serious. They're claiming 3 categories: financial instability, social withdrawal, and diminished self-care. All lies, I said softly. I know, but the court doesn't. And if Evan narrates this the right way, the judge will see what Evan wants them to see. Nolan pushed his glasses higher. You did the right thing avoiding that unofficial evaluator last night. But from here on, every move you make must be documented. I asked, what do I do next? He looked straight into my eyes. We counterattack. We went over the steps. Submitting doctor, Hale's psychological evaluation, proving I'm fully competent. Filing a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition. Preparing for an emergency protection order if Evan or Lydia escalated further. Gathering witnesses who could speak to my independence. Lucy would be one. But the most important part, we must show a pattern of financial abuse, years of it, Nolan said. We must reveal the truth, that you are the victim, not the danger. I stared at my coffee cup, the steam mingling with the smell of damp paper. It reminded me of mornings long ago when Evan was in grade school, me making cocoa, him complaining about math homework. Now he was telling the court, Mother demonstrates erratic behavior and is incapable of responsible decision-making. It almost made me laugh, how absurd it was. I was the one who kept this household alive after my husband died. I paid medical bills, mortgages, tuition. I survived loss and held my family together with both hands. And Evan? A man who has never stood alone, now positioning himself as the responsible one. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. Mr. Nolan, are we going to lose? He didn't hesitate. No, but you must understand this. Evan and Lydia are committed. They're not afraid of getting dirty. I nodded. If they want to drag me through the mud, I'll walk through it without sinking. He smiled, a rare pull at the corner of his mouth. Later that afternoon, I went to the bank for the first time since locking all the secondary accounts. Jasmine, the branch manager, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you here to strengthen your account protections?" I handed her the summons. She read it, exhaled hard. "You're doing the right thing protecting yourself. You'd be shocked how many cases like this we see." "Many?" I asked quietly. "More than you'd ever want to imagine." She helped me set up a third layer of authentication, a private code only she and the regional manager could access. When I left the bank, my spine felt straighter, not because I'd won anything, but because I had taken a step back into ownership of my own life. I'd barely stepped into my kitchen when the doorbell rang, a sharp, heavy sound. I walked to the front window. Evan. Standing in the rain, soaked through, hands in his pockets, his face tense like a man walking out of an interrogation room. I didn't open the door, I just watched. He knocked again. "Mom, we need to talk." I stayed still. "Mom, please, I know you're in there." His voice softened, not with love, but with strategy. Still, I didn't move. "Mom, I just want to help." Help. If this was help, I didn't want to see what harm looked like. When he finally realized I wouldn't respond, his shoulders dropped. He turned, walked toward his car, and drove off without looking back. I kept watching the empty driveway long after his car disappeared. Not with anger, not with heartbreak. Just silence. A silence shaped like acceptance. The acceptance that something inside me had snapped free from a lie I'd carried too long. That night, I sat in my living room, the warm lamp glow stretching across the hardwood floor. The rain had stopped. Only quiet remained. A quiet that felt like it came from the future, not the present. A future where I wasn't controlled, wasn't drained, wasn't treated like a resource. A future I would have to fight for, with law, with clarity, with every ounce of self-respect I'd lost, and was now reclaiming piece by piece. I thought that after Evan stood in the rain the day before, things might calm down, at least for a day or two. But I was wrong. The next morning, when I stepped outside to grab the paper, I saw them. 3 envelopes, no stamps, no cinder, no return address. One slightly crooked to the left, one dead center on the welcome mat, one tucked halfway beneath the flower pot. Trouble has a shape, and I recognized that shape instantly. The first envelope was from my sister Elaine. "Marian, please call Evan. The whole family is worried." The second, from a distant aunt I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. "If you need anything, just ask, but don't shut your children out. They're hurting." The third, no greeting, no name, no warmth. "Your children say you're having mental difficulties. If you need a place to stay while you recover, I have a spare room." I stood there on the porch, cold wind slipping around me, holding the letters so tight the paper nearly wrinkled. 24 hours. That's all it took. 24 hours since I refused to open the door for Evan, and already the entire extended family had been fed the same story. Marian is unstable. Marian is confused. Marian needs help. The smear campaign had begun. Fast, clean, vicious. Around noon, I was making tea when Lucy rushed over, knocking hard. "Marian, you need to see this." She held up her phone, a Facebook post, from someone on Lydia's side of the family. A blurry photo of my front gate. The caption: "When an elderly mother begins pushing her children away and behaving erratically." Below were dozens of comments. Older folks get isolated easily these days. I heard she's been acting strange for a while. Poor Evan and Lydia, they've tried everything. I felt heat rise up my face, not embarrassment, but recognition. I knew this move. This was the classic first blow in a guardianship battle. Destroy the mother's credibility, because when a woman's reputation is cracked enough, every protest she makes becomes paranoid. Every question becomes confusion. Every defense becomes evidence. Lucy's eyes were tight with anger and sympathy. This isn't random, Marian. Someone is crafting a narrative. I sank into a chair, hands around my warm cup, steam brushing my face, but the warmth couldn't touch the cold running down my spine. "It's Evan," I whispered. Lucy shook her head. "Not alone. This has Lydia's fingerprints all over it." She knows how to frame things so people believe her before they question her. I didn't argue. I knew she was right. Lydia had always been a master manipulator, a sweet smile over a sharpened blade. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang again. The caller ID said Claudia, Lydia's mother. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was soft, almost soothing. "Marian, I heard what's going on. We're all very concerned about you." I gripped the phone harder. "There's nothing to be concerned about," Claudia sighed dramatically. "Well, Lydia tells us you've been isolating yourself, cutting off communication, even refusing medical care." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I saw a clinical psychologist last week, Claudia. I have a clean cognitive assessment in front of me." Silence. I could practically hear the gears in her head stop mid-spin. Then she recalibrated. "Oh, well, there must be some misunderstanding. But Evan is heartbroken, Marian. He said you locked all your accounts and wouldn't explain why." "My accounts are not a safety net for two adults who refuse to stand on their own," I replied. Claudia's tone shifted, losing its airy sweetness. "Marian, you're making this so much harder than it needs to be." "And your daughter," I said evenly, "is making this as dirty as she wants it to be." A sharp inhale on her end. "I'm not trying to intervene, but if this keeps escalating, people will have no choice but to make it public. The church, the community, local papers." "Claudia," I cut in, "you can say it plainly. You're threatening me." She didn't respond, then hung up. But the worst part of that day didn't come from the relatives. It came from Evan himself. Around 6 p.m., I received a text. "Mom, I'm sorry I had to do this, but everyone says you're not okay. If you had opened the door yesterday, none of this would have happened. I love you, but I have to protect my family. You're giving me no choice." No choice. How many times had I heard those exact words every time he needed money? And now he was using the same line to justify dragging me into court as an incompetent woman. I stared at the message for a long time, then turned off my phone. No reply. I didn't eat dinner that night, not out of sadness, but because my mind felt painfully clear, sharp, and one truth shone like headlights on wet pavement outside my window. Evan and Lydia didn't just want money. They wanted power. Power over my life. Power over my choices. Power over my silence. They wanted to shrink me down into someone manageable, someone apologetic, someone scared. But no, I had found something I had lost long ago, my self-respect. And once a woman picks that back up, she never goes back to being someone's walking bank account. A little before 10 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, not like the frantic pounding from days before. I peeked out the window. Lucy stood there with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Marian?" she said. "I know you don't want company, but you need to see this." She handed me her phone again, a 15-second video recorded from the back pew of our church, Evan and Lydia sitting in the front row. Lydia leaning in close to the pastor, speaking softly, but the audio was clear enough. "We're just so worried about her. She's changed. We're scared she'll be alone and something terrible will happen." My knees felt weak. They had taken this into the church, into the one place where I spent decades praying, volunteering, serving, a community where every word carried weight. Lucy touched my wrist gently. "You're not just fighting for money anymore, Marian. You're fighting for the right to exist as yourself." I sat down, the whole house breathing with me, slow, tight, heavy. I knew then, the day of the first court hearing, I would be standing alone, against a story my own son had built from the bones of my sacrifice. But I also knew something else, something stronger than the hurt. I was no longer a mother who bowed her head. I was Marian Whitmore, a woman finally learning that defending herself is not a sin. The morning of the first hearing, Cincinnati was cold enough to bite. No snow, just that damp Midwestern cold, the kind that sneaks down your collar and clings to your skin like someone's breathing against the back of your neck. I stepped out of the car with my hand wrapped tight around my small handbag. Inside was everything I needed. The mental capacity evaluation from Dr. Mitchell, the closed bank account records, the list of transactions Evan and Lydia had misused, and most importantly, the calm I'd been practicing for 3 weeks. Attorney Nolan met me on the courthouse steps. "Mrs. Marian," he said quietly, "they're going to hit hard today, but I'm here. We have the truth." The truth. Sometimes it isn't enough, but it was the only solid ground I had left. When we walked into the courtroom, I saw Evan and Lydia already seated on the left side. Lydia wore a beige sweater, hair pulled back in a low knot, makeup soft and minimal. The kind of look that says, "I'm exhausted from worrying about my mother-in-law." Evan had on a pale blue shirt and a gray tie. His hands were clasped together, twisting slightly, but his eyes kept darting toward me. That look made my heart ache, not out of fear, not even anger, but because of an unspoken question that wouldn't leave my chest. When did my son become such a stranger? I didn't let myself stare. I couldn't. Not because I was weak, but because I knew they were watching my reactions, ready to turn every flicker of emotion into evidence. Nolan leaned in. "Don't look at them unless I cue you. Every glance can be misread." I nodded. The hearing began. Judge Collins, a man in his 60s with a stern face but gentle eyes, skimmed the file. Petition for guardianship over Mrs. Marian Whitmore, age 68. Grounds: risk of financial self-harm, unstable behavior, refusal to cooperate with family, risk of isolation. Each word felt like a hammer hitting the wooden bench. Evan was called first. I lifted my head, not to meet his eyes, but to look at his hands. They were trembling slightly. I had never seen my son's hands shake before. Nolan whispered, "They'll start with emotion. Brace yourself." And they did. Evan began speaking in a small, wavering voice, like he was barely holding back tears. "I just want my mom to be safe. She's changed over the last few months. She refuses to see us, refuses to open the door, refuses medical care." "Do you have evidence of this?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Evan handed over a stack of papers. I recognized them instantly. The unanswered texts, the phone calls I let go to voicemail, the photos of my house from the street, lights off, doors closed. My fingers tightened in my lap. Every piece of it was true, but not the whole truth. Evan continued. "She suddenly shut down all joint accounts. No explanation. She treats everyone like the enemy now." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Lydia sat behind him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, occasionally patting his back, like her heart was breaking right there on the bench. I heard the faintest hint of a scoff in Nolan's throat, so soft almost no one would notice, but enough for me to know he recognized the performance. Then it was Lydia's turn. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. "I love Marian like my own mother," Lydia began, her voice trembling. "But I've seen her talk to the kitchen light. I've seen her leave a pot on the stove for 3 hours. I've seen her open the back door at 2 a.m. and just stand there for ages." My mouth fell open. My whole body surged toward protest on instinct. None of it was true, not one word. Nolan's hand closed gently around my wrist, squeezing. "Don't," he whispered. Judge Collins studied Lydia more closely. "Do you have any proof of these incidents?" "No, sir," she said, bowing her head. "But I swear I'm telling the truth." I didn't shout. I didn't jump up. I didn't argue. I just sat there. But inside, something caught fire. Not rage, not heartbreak. Clarity. The people sitting across from me were no longer family. They were legal opponents, and they would say whatever they had to convince this court that I was no longer in control of myself. Finally, it was my turn. Nolan called me to the stand. I stood up. My legs did not shake. I placed my hand on the edge of the witness stand, feeling the cool grain of the wood under my palm. Nolan started gently, just like he'd promised. "Mrs. Marian, can you tell the court what your life has actually looked like over the past 3 months?" I drew in a slow breath and told them. No theatrics, no attacks, no attempts to paint anyone as a monster. Just the truth, exactly how I'd lived it. That I had voluntarily scheduled a psychological evaluation. That I grocery shopped regularly. That I still tended my backyard every morning. That I had closed the secondary cards not because I was unstable, but because I had been financially exploited for years. We submitted Dr. Mitchell's evaluation, the spreadsheets of expenses, the credit card statement showing Evan and Lydia's long trail of non-essential spending. Nolan asked, "Mrs. Marian, why didn't you open the door when Evan came to visit?" I looked straight at Judge Collins. "Because I was afraid of being recorded, Your Honor. I was afraid every word I said would be used to prove something that isn't true. I was afraid they'd take my shaky voice, my breathing, my emotions, and twist them into evidence that I lack capacity." The courtroom went still. I continued, my voice low but clear. "I'm not afraid of losing money. I'm afraid of losing the right to live as an adult." The judge tilted his head slightly, his eyes no longer just stern, but thoughtful. Evan shifted like he wanted to respond, but his attorney tugged lightly at his sleeve, signaling him to stay quiet. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lydia give the faintest shake of her head, as if whispering, "Don't. If you react now, we lose ground." And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. By the end of the hearing, Judge Collins spoke. "The court will order an independent capacity evaluation, appointed by the court, not by the family. In the meantime, no guardian will be assigned. Mrs. Whitmore will continue to manage her own life and finances. Not a victory. Not yet. But they couldn't touch my accounts. They couldn't take my signature. They couldn't move me like a piece on their board. Not while the court was still deciding." Evan lowered his head. Lydia's lips pressed so tight they turned white. Nolan exhaled quietly, like a man who had just stepped away from a live explosive. I walked out of the courthouse and into the thin, early afternoon light. No one waited for me outside. No umbrella held above my head. No, "Mom, let me drive you home." But I didn't feel sad. I felt upright. My shoulders weren't slumped. My steps didn't drag. And for the first time in months, I understood something deep and unexpected. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I woke up on the day of the independent evaluation earlier than usual. Not because I was afraid, but because of that suspended, uneasy feeling, the sense of stepping into the final round of a game I never imagined I'd have to play. Morning light pushed through the curtains, washing the wooden floor in a pale glow. Everything looked peaceful, but I knew that in just a few hours, every inch of this house would become evidence. My living space, my last safe place, was about to be inspected, documented, and analyzed like a crime scene. I brewed my coffee, the scent drifting gently through the kitchen. I breathed it in. Today, I had to be fully awake. 9:12 a.m., exactly the time they said. A knock on the door, light but unmistakably firm. I opened it. 2 people stood on the porch. A middle-aged woman holding a clipboard and wearing a professional, polite smile. A younger man behind her, carrying a small equipment bag. The woman stepped forward. "Mrs. Marian Whitmore? I'm Marjorie Hale, the court-appointed evaluator. This is my colleague, Aiden." Not the man from last time. This was the real team, the ones whose signatures could determine whether I remained in control of my own life. I invited them in. I had prepared the house for 3 days straight, not to hide anything, but to eliminate any chance of misinterpretation. Marjorie walked in and scanned the room with a level of professionalism that bordered on cold. "We'll begin with an environmental assessment," she said. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Go right ahead." They started in the kitchen. Marjorie opened the fridge, one shelf at a time. She scribbled notes: fresh produce, expiration dates, organization. "Mrs. Marian, how often do you grocery shop?" "Once a week," I said. "Twice if there are discounts." She nodded. Aiden snapped a few quick photos, standard procedure. Then they moved on to the medicine cabinet. "Do you ever forget your medication?" she asked. I gave her the calm, measured smile I had practiced for days. "I set a phone alarm every night at 8. "If you'd like, I can show you." She blinked, surprised for a moment. "That's excellent. Very good." Next came the living room. They checked the artwork on the walls, my planner, utility bills, even the wall calendar. "Do you forget to pay bills?" Marjorie asked. "I have automatic payments. Here." I showed her the bank's payment log. More notes, more photos. Then came the bedroom, the place I feared most. Not because I had anything to hide, but because a bedroom is the most private corner of a life, and they entered it like it was their duty. Marjorie opened the closet. Do you do your own laundry? I use the machine every weekend. Do you have trouble changing your sheets? The question was so absurd I nearly laughed, but I knew the script. This was how they tested for cracks. I changed them this morning, I said. If needed, I can demonstrate. Aiden looked at me with something like respect. Not because I was exceptional, but because I wasn't panicking, something they often expected from people suspected of incapacity. Finally, they asked me to sit at the kitchen table for the cognitive evaluation. The usual questions. Where are you right now? What day is it? Who is the governor of Ohio? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Can you recall 3 words after 5 minutes? I answered everything, firm voice, steady hands. It was bitter, yes, to be 68 years old, having lived through loss, raised children, worked for decades, and now forced to prove I knew the date. But I swallowed the bitterness. I wasn't fighting for pride. I was fighting for my life. Then came the final question, the one that mattered more than all the others. Mrs. Marian, Marjorie said, why do you believe your family filed for guardianship? I looked her straight in the eyes. In her gaze I saw the expectation, the hope that I would slip, say something emotional, something inconsistent, something they could write down as instability. But I kept my voice even, almost gentle, like telling a story over tea. Because I closed the credit cards my son and his wife were using without limits. And when someone has lived off you for 10 years, they start to see independence as an insult. The kitchen went still. Nobody moved their pen. Nobody made a sound. I continued, almost whispering. I'm not confused. I'm not weak. I'm simply tired of paying for adults who refuse to be adults. Marjorie studied me for a long time. She didn't write anything. She didn't argue. She just looked, as if she were seeing past the story Evan and Lydia had crafted. More than an hour later, the assessment was complete. Marjorie stood, closing her clipboard. Mrs. Marian, I've finished my preliminary evaluation. We'll submit the report within 48 hours. Aiden gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. Thank you for cooperating. Most people don't stay this composed. I nodded. Thank you for coming. They walked out, down the steps, into their car. The doors shut, the engine started. The vehicle rolled down the driveway and disappeared behind the trees. I watched until it vanished, and only then did my legs soften beneath me. Not from fear, but from the tension of having to remain calm for over an hour, like walking on thin ice where a single wrong word could shatter everything. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. A long breath slipped out of my chest, soft, shaky, like someone had finally opened a window for the whole house to exhale. The results would arrive in 48 hours. 48 hours to find out whether I would keep the right to live my own life, or be labeled incompetent by my own children. But in that moment, I felt no fear, only clarity. I had fought with every ounce of my awareness. And awareness is the one thing they can never take from me. The 2 days I waited for the independent evaluation results were the longest days since all of this began. Not because I feared being labeled incompetent, but because I knew, deep down, that those results would determine Evan and Lydia's next move. If the report proved I was perfectly sound, then half of their plan to gain control over my life would collapse. And they would shift to something else. I could feel it the way animals sense a storm long before clouds gather. On the morning of the second day, I was making tea when my phone buzzed. It was Nolan. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Marian, the report is in. My heartbeat slowed, almost painfully. Tell me. You were evaluated as fully competent. No signs of cognitive decline. No risk of financial self-harm. No behavioral abnormalities whatsoever. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, closing my eyes. Not relief, not triumph, just the quiet feeling of someone who has walked across a burning bridge and somehow reached the other side. Nolan continued. They even praised you for being clear-minded, independent, and well-organized. A soft laugh escaped me, deep, tired and oddly peaceful. Not the laugh of someone who won, but the laugh of someone who finally got something she should never have had to fight for in the first place. The court will review the report at the next hearing. Nolan added, I believe Judge Collins will use it to dismiss the guardianship petition. Does Evan know yet? I asked. They likely received the report at the same time we did. And Nolan paused. I doubt they're taking it well. I didn't have to wait long to learn what not well meant. About an hour later, Lucy knocked on my door, face flushed with anger. Marian, you need to see this. She handed me her phone, a brand new Facebook post from one of Lydia's sisters, the woman I'd met once 10 years ago at a birthday party. The post read, It breaks my heart to see an elderly woman deteriorating because her family isn't stepping in. Why do children let things get this far? Below it was a blurry photo of my house in the dark lights off, taken from the street. And the worst part? #ProtectOurElders. A chill slid down my spine, not from fear, but from recognition. They were preparing public opinion. If they couldn't win in court, they would win on social narrative. Lucy squeezed my hand. Marian, this isn't a family conflict anymore. This is a campaign. I nodded. I knew that already. That afternoon, while I was watering the flowers in the backyard, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I glanced through the kitchen window. An SUV I recognized. Evan's. But he wasn't alone this time. Lydia stepped out first, fast, sharp, like she was carrying a storm inside her. Evan followed, eyes red, looking like he'd just argued with someone all morning. They didn't knock. They stood in the middle of my driveway, staring at the house as if I owed them an explanation. I didn't go out. I stayed behind the kitchen curtain, watching. Lydia was the first to speak, not yelling, but her voice cut through the air like glass. Marian, do you have any idea what you've just done to this family? Evan touched her arm gently, but she shrugged him off. I stayed quiet. She continued. We saw the results. You manipulated those people to get what you wanted, didn't you? My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. Evan took a step closer. Mom, please, we need to talk. I still said nothing, because I knew one thing. One sentence, one tremor in my voice would be enough for Lydia to twist it into proof of instability. I wasn't giving her that. Lydia grew angrier, kicking the tire of their SUV. There, that's it. Silence. You always hide behind silence. What do you want from us, Marian? Evan spoke quietly then, sounding exhausted. Lydia, enough. She spun toward him, eyes blazing. No, Evan, she can't tear us apart and then act innocent. Evan closed his eyes, longer than usual, and in that single moment, I knew something inside him had cracked, not for me, but because Lydia had said too much, more than she meant to, more than he could defend. Lydia never understood that Evan, weak as he could be, still cared deeply about how he looked in front of others, and she had just berated his mother in full view of neighbors peeking through their blinds. Evan muttered darkly, Lydia, this is enough. Let's go. No! She snapped. We're not done! He ignored her, turning toward the car. Lydia stood alone for a few seconds, chest heaving, face flushed with fury. Then she looked at my house, not like a daughter-in-law, not like family, but like a rival, a threat. Marian, you think you've won? This isn't over. She climbed into the SUV and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the window panes. The car sped away, tires scraping the pavement. When they disappeared behind the trees, I finally exhaled. Not because I felt safe, but because I finally understood something heavy and irrevocable. Evan was no longer steering this fight. Lydia was. And a woman like Lydia, when she starts losing control, becomes dangerous. That night, I opened my laptop, not to scroll through social media, but to check my email. There it was, a message from Nolan. Evan has filed an amended motion. They're requesting further investigation based on signs of social withdrawal and emotional instability. They may try to use church members or community pressure to influence the court. I closed the laptop slowly. I knew. I had seen that in Lydia's eyes. She'd realized the court was no longer an easy arena for them. So she would play another game, shift public opinion, paint herself and Evan as victims, turn me into an unstable mother pushing her family away. I know people like Lydia. I've met them all my life. They don't back down. They don't stay clean. And when cornered, they bite. I leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses gently on your shoulders. The kind of quiet that makes the ticking clock sound like a heartbeat. I didn't shake. I didn't crumble. I didn't retreat. But for the first time since this began, I felt truly alone. Not in a self-pitying way, but in the way a soldier feels standing on the battlefield, looking around and realizing she's the only one on her side of the line. Yet I also understood something else, clear as breath. I'm not fighting to defeat them. I'm fighting not to lose myself. And that is a very different kind of war. I thought that after Lydia's outburst in my driveway, she would need a few days to calm down. But I underestimated her. People like Lydia, when they feel control slipping through their fingers, never pause. They accelerate, and the next morning I received the first proof of it. I was pouring coffee when my phone started buzzing non-stop, messages pouring in, from Lucy, from neighbors, from an old church friend I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Marian, have you checked the community group? They're talking about you. Hurry, something's wrong." I opened my phone, tapped into the Maple Ridge Community Facebook group, the one I usually only checked for farmers market dates and bear sightings. And I saw it. A large post, over 100 comments in less than an hour. The first line read, "Anyone living near Maple Ridge must have noticed the elderly woman at number 24. I'm concerned. She lives alone, rarely comes out, and sometimes seems confused. I heard the family is trying to help, but she refuses." Below were more than 20 photos taken from a distance. Closed door, lights off. One shot even captured me bending over to water my plants, but taken from an angle that made me look unstable. I set my phone down on the table. I didn't need to ask who posted it. The phrasing, the innuendo, the selective photos, the way it planted suspicion without stating any real facts, all of it had Lydia's fingerprints. And the worst part? The comments. Poor lady. Should someone call Adult Protective Services? Elderly people lose clarity without realizing it. The family really needs to step in. Comment after comment repeated the same idea. I was the problem, not Evan, not Lydia, me. I placed both hands on the table, inhaling slowly to keep my breath steady, not because I was ashamed, but because I felt something settle deep inside me. The battle had left the courtroom. Now it was happening right outside my front door. In the eyes of neighbors, in whispers of the community, a war of reputation, and Lydia knew it. Hurting a mother's name can cut sharper than any legal tactic. That afternoon, I stepped out to get the mail. Just a few steps, but I felt every pair of eyes on me. A jogger looked at me a bit too long. A woman walking her dog paused for several seconds as she passed. A neighbor I once baked pumpkin bread for every Halloween glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as though my gaze might burn him. I stood in the driveway, gripping the envelopes. "I'm still me," I whispered. "I'm still the woman who's lived here for 30 years. But the air felt different. A woman walking by gave me the usual polite nod, but her eyes held something searching, something assessing. I understood. Lydia's story had taken root. That evening, Lucy knocked on my door. "I just came back from church," she said, voice soft enough for only us to hear. "Someone is spreading unpleasant things." "About me?" Lucy nodded. "I don't know who started it, but they said you've been shutting out your son, showing signs of depression. And Lydia," Lucy sighed. "She cried, Marian. She cried in front of everyone. Told them the family is just trying to help you." I closed my eyes for a moment. Church had been my community for decades, the place where I baked for Christmas brunches, the place where I donated coats every winter. And now, I was the woman who needed supervision. Lucy rested her hand on my arm. "Marian, Lydia is very good at emotional manipulation, and people don't know the real story." I asked quietly, "How much do they believe her?" Lucy hesitated, then answered honestly, "If I didn't live next to you, if I only heard what they're saying, I might doubt you too." It hurt more than I expected, but it was the truth, and I needed truth. Later that evening, as I was clearing the dinner table, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Marian Whitmore? A man's voice, calm, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Reverend Paul Harris, the interim pastor at Maple Ridge Church. I straightened. I already knew why he was calling. What can I do for you, Reverend? He exhaled softly, choosing his words carefully. I don't wish to intrude in family matters, but some members have expressed concern for your well-being. They mentioned you've been isolating yourself and losing connection with the community. I clenched my jaw. I haven't lost any connection, I said slowly, clearly. I'm dealing with a complicated legal issue my family created. The Reverend was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, I just want you to know, the church doors are always open. If you ever need support or someone to talk to. What he didn't say, but what was painfully obvious was, we've heard you're not well. I thanked him politely, but when I hung up, my hand felt cold. Not because he doubted me, but because Lydia had successfully pushed the story so far, the church now believed they needed to protect me. Less than 30 minutes later, a text from Evan appeared. Mom, I'm sorry about how things are going, but if you'd let us take over the legal and financial decisions, this wouldn't spread this way. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the screen for a long time. So that was the point. Not my safety, not my health, not concern, pressure. They wanted me scared, humiliated, cornered, so I would surrender. I put the phone down without replying, not because I was angry at Evan, but because I finally understood. He was caught between two fires, Lydia on one side, me on the other. And he would always choose whatever made his life easier. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window, watching tree shadows stretch across the wall, and I thought for a very long time about one thing. Even if I win in court, if they keep destroying my name out here, I still lose. I lose neighbors, I lose friends, I lose my place in the community. And most painfully, I lose myself if I let them do this to me. I closed my eyes and placed my hand over my chest. Then I whispered, not a declaration, but a vow. I won't let them define me. Not the court, not my family, not social media, not the stories they build out of lies. I will take my voice back. Even if it means doing the one thing I've avoided my whole life. Confrontation. I barely slept the night after Reverend Harris called. Not because I was scared. Fear wasn't the point anymore. It was something else. A strange kind of clarity that kept growing quietly inside me. Like when you're standing on a hill at dusk and suddenly see the whole city laid out in front of you. The roads, the bridges, the way everything connects. The truth was simple. I'd been playing defense for too long, and Lydia had taken every second of my silence and used it like a knife, carving out a story that belonged to her, not to me. By morning, I walked down to the kitchen and opened the window wide, letting the first light pour in. The air was cool, sharp, clean, the kind of air Ohio only holds on to for a short while in spring. A strip of sunlight slid across my old wooden table, so gentle and steady that I could hear my own breathing. Good, I said softly. It's time. Today was the last court date before the final decision. I got to the courthouse almost 30 minutes early. Nolan was waiting by the front steps. Mrs. Marian, he said, lowering his voice. I've seen all the posts they put up last night. They're trying to whip up public pressure before we walk in there. I know, I replied. The court could see that as a form of manipulation. I don't want revenge, I cut in. I just want them to stop. Nolan looked at me for a long second. His eyes softened just a little. I'll do everything I can. We went inside. The courtroom was fuller than usual. A few neighbors, some church members, faces I recognized from an old community fundraiser 10 years ago. Lydia had definitely made her calls. I could feel it in the way people looked at me. Not hateful, but unsure. Like they were waiting for confirmation that I was either the villain or the victim they'd been told about. Evan and Lydia were already seated on the left side. Evan looked exhausted, hair slightly messy, shirt not as crisp as usual, shoulders slumped. Lydia, she was still put together, but something in her eyes looked stretched thin, like someone holding too tightly onto something fragile, knowing it might shatter anyway. The hearing started. Judge Collins scanned each side, then opened the file. "We have the independent competency evaluation," he began. "The conclusion is, Mrs. Marian Whitmore is fully competent, self-sufficient, and does not require a guardian." I saw Evan's shoulders sag. Lydia's lips pressed together so hard they almost turned white. The judge continued. "Before I issue a final ruling, do either party have any additional statements or evidence they wish to submit?" Nolan stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to submit additional documentation." He placed a thick file onto the table. I knew exactly what it was. Printed screenshots of every post Lydia and her circle had made in the last 2 weeks. Nolan opened the file and spoke in that calm, even tone of his. "These are posts misrepresenting Mrs. Whitmore's mental state, photos taken without her knowledge. Comments suggesting psychiatric issues with no medical basis, and most importantly, clear efforts to influence her social circle and church community to prejudge her condition before this hearing." The room murmured. Judge Collins frowned, not in anger, in disappointment. Nolan went on. "Your Honor, no one is saying the petitioners wrote every comment, but people only try to bend public opinion." He paused, then finished quietly. "When they suspect they may not win where the truth actually matters." Just one sentence, but it landed in the room like a hammer. Judge Collins turned to the left. "Mrs. Lydia, Mr. Evan, would you like to respond?" Lydia rose slowly, trying to hold on to her composure. "Your Honor, we didn't tell anyone to do this. I only talked to my family because we were worried about Mom. If someone posted online, it was a misunderstanding." Nolan lifted an eyebrow, just slightly. Judge Collins tapped his pen lightly against the desk. "Mrs. Lydia, one of these posts was made from your phone. The IP address matches your device." The room went silent. Evan turned toward Lydia, his face draining of color. "Lydia, what did you do?" She took half a step back. I didn't. They told me." Her voice cracked. Not from remorse. From fear of being exposed. And then the part that hurt me the most happened. Evan stood up and looked straight at me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know Lydia was doing all of that." I looked into his eyes, the eyes of a grown man finally realizing he'd let someone else steer his choices for far too long. But I didn't say anything. Judge Collins sighed. Then he spoke. "The petition for guardianship is denied, fully. The petitioners have no standing to refile, unless entirely new, legitimate evidence emerges. Mrs. Marian Whitmore will remain in full control of her finances and her personal life." I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I just closed my eyes the way you do when you finally set a heavy door down on its hinges and take one slow step back. The hearing adjourned. Evan approached me as people filtered out. "Mom, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought—" "I know," I said. "You thought it would be simple." He dropped his gaze. "I'm sorry. I really am." I looked at my son. I wasn't angry anymore, but I couldn't pretend the fracture didn't exist. Some cracks don't disappear. They just stop hurting as sharply. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but you're going to have to live with the choices you made." Lydia walked over, eyes red, mascara slightly smudged. "Marian, I held up my hand. "Don't apologize to me," I said. "Apologize to yourself." She froze, then turned away, the first time I'd ever seen her without that thin layer of arrogance she wore like perfume. I walked out of the courthouse into the soft gold of late afternoon. No one walked beside me. No hand held my arm as I went down the steps, but the air was cool, the sky felt high and open, and I realized my spine was straighter than it had been in years. I stopped for a moment on the stretch of grass in front of the building and took a deep breath. Not to calm down, but because I could feel it, Clearly, I had come back to myself. I was no longer the mother they took for granted, no longer the woman who stayed quiet, no longer the walking wallet everyone assumed would always be open. I was Marian Whitmore. I stood up, and I saved myself. If my story reminded you of your own, or of someone in your family who has stayed quiet for too long, leave me a small sign by hitting the like button on this video. And if you want to hear more journeys like this one, stories about courage, about boundaries, and about finding yourself again when you're no longer young, hit subscribe so we can meet again in the next stories. Thank you for being here with me.